may now request Madam Jayanti Shah to give the welcome address.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. I welcome you all on behalf of on behalf of MPLF. We are so glad to have you all here this evening. We appreciate your presence at this difficult time. We would like to extend a special welcome to our speaker, Ms. Anita Bhaktwani, who is going to speak on laws of writs. We take it a great pleasure and joy to inform that it is our 21st webinar today. And we would have not pulled off this 21st webinar without hard work of our MPLF team, who have worked tirelessly for all our meets. Ma'am, we are all excited to participate in this meeting organized by MPLF and learn more on laws of writs. So friends, hope this meeting inspires us and enlighten us in the fields of writs. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Jayanti Shah. May I now request Advocate Soham Panse to give the introduction of the speaker.
Yes. Hello all and good afternoon. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce our esteemed speaker for today, Advocate Anita Bhaktwani. It gives me immense pleasure to state that she has been practicing since 1990 on the civil side, and she was the first lawyer at Bhiwandi district of Thane. She has practiced in trial courts. Of Thane and is now currently practicing in Bombay High Court, and has a rich experience of handling various matters of revenue under MRT and as well as PCPNDT matters and negotiable instruments as well as the negotiable instrument matters, and now she is expertising in the prevention of sexual harassment at workplace. So by this, I hand over the forum to ma'am to enlighten us on law of writs, which is a very interesting subject for me. So over to you, ma'am.
It's a great pleasure to have another lecture with MPLF, which started off during the lockdown period and is continuing with all its rigors. The efforts of MPLF are evident from the fact that today we have a 21st lecture, and all these lectures are being given by the members of MPLF and not any outsiders. So this is a very great opportunity for all the members of MPLF to take this opportunity and give your own study lecture on any topic, so that even it gives you an opportunity to yourself increase knowledge as well as the knowledge of all your colleagues. With this, I seek permission of MPLF to begin with law of writs. I'll be sharing the notes which I have prepared on this law of writs, so that the process becomes smoother, and you can, whatever points, if anybody misses, can read it out from the screen also. Because the screen I have given, though in short, but I have given all the points relating to law of writs. So may I begin with my lecture now?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, first and foremost, what is a writ? The simplified meaning of the writ is that it's a written official order issued by the court in the form of a warrant, a command, an order, direction, and these writs are issued under Article 226 and 227 by the Honorable High Court and under Article 32 by the Honorable Supreme Court. Basic difference between a writ and an order will be that the writ is issued to provide an extraordinary remedy, which is usually against the administrative orders, whereas orders are passed in all matters. All writs can be termed as orders. All writs can be orders, but all orders cannot be writs. That is to say that the ambit of order is larger than that of a writ. Now, what is Article 32? Article 32 is a fundamental right to enforce fundamental rights. Why do I say that? Because Article 32 is included in Part 3 of the Constitution. For enforcement of rights, This article gives powers to the Supreme Court to issue various writs, that is, writ of habeas corpus, writ of quo warranto, writ of certiorari, and writ of mandamus, as well as writ of prohibitions. Now, if we have to, in short, understand what is Article 32, as you can see it on my screen, writs and order remedies for enforcement of right conferred by this part. The right to move the Supreme Court by appropriate proceedings for the enforcement of the rights conferred by this part is guaranteed. So that means, in short, this says that this is a fundamental right for enforcement of fundamental rights. It says under section Article 32(2), the Supreme Court shall have power to issue directions or orders or writs, including writs in the nature of habeas corpus, mandamus, prohibition, quo warranto, writ of certiorari, whichever may be appropriate for the enforcement of rights conferred by this Act. Now, Article 32 is so important that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar himself said that it is the most important article of the Constitution, without which the Constitution would be a nullity. In fact, he considered it as a heart and soul of the Constitution. Now, to elaborate it further, why do we need this Article 32? We need this Article 32 because merely grant of fundamental rights by the Constitution would not have helped the citizens of India. To help the citizens of India derive the benefit of the fundamental rights guaranteed under the Constitution, a mechanism providing for the enforcement is essential. So therefore, in other words, I would say that rights, in order to be meaningful, must be enforceable and be backed by remedies in case of violation. Now, so therefore, this Article 32 guarantees the right to move the Supreme Court by appropriate proceedings for the enforcement of fundamental rights and deals with the Supreme Court's power to issue writ, order or writs for the enforcement of fundamental rights. Going further ahead, there are certain very important judgments which are delivered by the Supreme Court, which not only indicate the powers of the Supreme Court, but also there is a citation passed by the Supreme Court which says that the Supreme Court is not only bestowed with the power of enforcement of fundamental rights, but in case there is a misuse by any party of the provisions of Article 32, in that case, the Supreme Court has enough powers to put cost on the litigant to ensure that nobody misuses the powers of Supreme Court under Article 32. In other words, no false and frivolous or rather vexatious litigations or any other kind of litigation which shows that the litigant is only trying to take disadvantage of the provisions of Article 32. The first citation under Article 32 that I would like to refer is cited in AIR Supreme Court 1983-378. Now, how this citation is important? This citation is important from three folds. The first part is that there was a journalist by name Sheila Barsey who simply issued a letter to the Supreme Court indicating that there was assault and torture of women prisoners. Now, that letter of Sheila Barsey was taken by Justice Bhagwati and it was treated as a writ petition. In that writ petition, Justice Bhagwati issued guidelines and directions of how to deal with the women prisoners in jail. It was because of this letter and because of the powers exercised by Justice Bhagwati under Article 32 of the Constitution of India that there were directions given whereby the jail authorities were directed to provide legal aid, to provide facility of lawyers, to enable the prisoners to meet their lawyers, to take advice or approach appropriate courts. Thereafter, female constables were made mandatory where women prisoners are lodged. Information to relatives, medical aid, and all other facilities that today we think of are a usual course to be provided to the prisoners was because of one of this judgment and exercise of powers under Article 32 that have been now granted to the prisoners, and the prisoners have a better, are ensured a better provision even while they are in jail. They are not treated inhumanly, or rather, if in case there is any inhuman treatment, or in fact, if there is any breach of these conditions which have been now provided by Justice Bhagwati's judgment, the prisoners can even approach the courts for seeking various relief and file complaints even against the jail authorities, therefore indicating that the right to against exploitation is right against exploitation is provided even against even to the prisoners, and who are now safeguarded from unnecessary harassment, assault, and torture. Then the second landmark judgment, which of course relates to my first lecture. If the participants here remember it, I had given a lecture on POSH, that is prevention of sexual harassment at workplace. Now that act also came into being because of the powers exercised by the Supreme Court under Article 32. In very short, I would like to just refresh the memory. This was a judgment which was passed on a litigation filed by an NGO against the harassment of Bhauri Devi, a social worker, and it was because of this litigation that the Supreme Court gave certain guidelines that this is the process that has to be followed at the workplace to see to it that there is prevention as well as there is redressal of sexual harassment at workplace. And it is because of this judgment, which is reported in 1997 6 Supreme Court cases, page number 241, and which is popularly known as Vishakha judgment, that resulted into the legislation of a new act, which is prevention of sexual harassment at workplace, which follows not only those guidelines but also in addition to it, to safeguard the interest of the victims, makes provisions which will be beneficial for the women to have a safe and conducive workplace, and their rights under various articles of the Constitution are not avoided, or rather now the women can work with all their self-respect and their dignity being guarded by the law itself. Then the third citation which I want to rely upon, and which emphasizes on a deterrence of deterrence of frivolous petitions. Now, this is a citation which is AIR 2013 Supreme Court 1561. In this case, what had happened is that the petitioner wanted to challenge certain provisions of SARFAESI, saying that they are illegal, null and void. But what the petitioner did was, a petition was filed under Article 226 in the High Court, as well as a petition under Article 32 was filed in the Honorable Supreme Court, seeking the same relief. To which, when this fact was brought to the knowledge of the Supreme Court very clearly not only dismissed the petition, but imposed cost of rupees 1 lakh upon the petitioner for filing such a petition before the Supreme Court. So this judgment clearly indicates the powers of the Supreme Court to deter false and double jeopardy litigations. Then the powers under Article 226 and 227. Now these are powers which are given to the Honorable High Court. Now we can say that Article 226 is similar to Article 32. The scope of Article 32 is giving powers to the Honorable Supreme Court, whereas the scope of Article 226 is giving powers to the Honorable High Court. In short, Article 226, even if you read at it, Article 226 empowers High Court to issue to any person or authority, including government, in appropriate cases, directions, orders, or writs, including writs of habeas corpus, mandamus, quo warranto, prohibitions, certiorari. So, reading of Article 226 clearly says that it resembles Article 32.2 of the Article 32.2, which defines powers of the Supreme Court. Now, what is Article 227? Article 227 is a power of superintendence given to the High Court. Now, superintendence over whom? Superintendence over the trial courts as well as the tribunals. Now, basic difference between we go to that next. Article 226 determines that every High Court shall have superintendence over all courts and tribunals throughout the territories in relation to which it exercises jurisdictions. Exception is that only courts formed under law related to the armed force. Article 227 will have no effect. The very basic practical difference between Article 226 and 227, very practical I say because this is what we do in the High Court, that when we file a petition under Article 226, the petition is heard by a division bench of the High Court. Whereas if a petition is filed under Article 227, it is heard single bench of the High Court. There are 5 types of writs. 5 types are, the first of them being writ of habeas corpus. This is a very widely known writ. All of you must be aware of this writ because all those practicing either on the criminal side or the matrimonial side must at many times being using it or having been heard about it. This is something like a search warrant being issued by the police authorities when a person is missing or is untraceable or is known in illegal confinement or detention of any other person. Either you get a search warrant issued, search for the person, but the other remedy which is provided is a writ of habeas corpus. Now, what is writ of habeas corpus? Firstly, what is the meaning of habeas corpus? A writ requiring a person under arrest of illegal detention to be brought before the judge or into the court, especially to secure the person's release unless lawful grounds are shown for the detention. So, in short, this is to produce a person in illegal detention. Now, this writ can be filed against a state as well as a person, meaning, supposing in case if a police authority has kept a person under its custody without arrest or without following a proper procedure under law, in that case, this writ will be filed against the state. The other writs which are issued is against a person. Now, when against a person, the most commonest form is where supposing two adults elope with an intention of marrying or otherwise, and the parents are opposing it. The best remedy the parents normally adopt is filed a writ of habeas corpus, seeking securing the presence of the girl before the court. So, this is the commonest form of habeas corpus against a person. Now, what are the grounds? Grounds which are required for issuance of a writ of habeas corpus generally are if a person has been detained illegally, unlawfully, without any jurisdiction. Now, detained illegally, unlawfully, without any jurisdiction. Secondly, if the detaining authority has acted contrary or against the law, or if the detention in itself is malified. Now, Article 21 and Article 22 are 2 articles which are provided under the Constitution itself, which provide that detention must be according to the procedure under the law. And second is the provisions of preventive detention. Now, if the authorities have violated either Article 21 or Article 22, in that case, the writ of habeas corpus can be issued against the state. Now, there is the object of habeas corpus would be, in short, preserving the right to freedom by a quick judicial review for pleaded wrongful action. So, writ of habeas corpus shall be issued to preserve the right of freedom. Now, who can file a writ of habeas corpus? A writ of habeas corpus can be filed by the person himself or by any other person. It could be a family member, maybe a husband, maybe father, maybe mother, brother, sister, anybody, or even a friend, but not a total stranger. Now, as in bail applications, you can file one bid, the second can be filed only if there is a fresh ground, given a writ of habeas corpus. There cannot be any successive applications unless and until fresh or new grounds are made out in the application itself. Then there is provision of appeal to the Supreme Court in case of rejection of writ of habeas corpus. To explain the writ of habeas corpus further, let us go to a few judgments which can clearly explain the facts and circumstances under which the writ of habeas corpus has been granted by the High Courts as well as the Supreme Courts. The first citations that I want to rely upon will be AIR 1983 Supreme Court 339, which is Veena Sethia versus State of Bihar. Now, in this case, this was almost like a PIL, wherein a petition was filed again through a letter that some prisoners who were insane at the time of trial but subsequently declared sane were not released due to inaction of state authorities and had to remain in jail from 20 to 30 years. In this petition, the court immediately directed their release. So this is sort of a PIL for the relief of habeas corpus. Then the second judgment is AIR 2006 Court SCC 792 KS Nagamathu versus State of Tamil Nadu. A very short and brief history of this matter is, this was a petition which was filed under the Customs Act, and before the appropriate officer could have taken Mr. Nagamathu under custody, he had issued a letter explaining the facts and circumstances of the acts which were unofficially being complained against him. However, that letter which was given by Mr. Nagamathu was not considered by the detaining authority, or rather the letter was not placed before the authority. In this case, the Supreme Court said that since the authority has not considered all the relevant material which ought to have been considered by it, therefore the detention is illegal, and the detention order was set aside, and Mr. Nagamathu was granted the relief of habeas corpus. Then he said without jurisdiction, as well as this next judgment, which is of Sau Radha Subhash Med versus State of Maharashtra. Sorry, I could not get the equivalent citation, but this is a very very distinct kind of a citation, which not only states forward the powers of the High Court in issuing the writ of habeas corpus, but in case a person has unnecessarily suffered because of his illegal detention, in that case also the High Court has very clearly awarded penalty which was to be paid by the authorities. Now, this is, in short, the facts are: the petitioner filed a petition to search and produce her husband, who was illegally detained since 16th of February 2006, as well as it was filed for compensation. Now, in this case, police from Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh detained the husband of the petitioner and produced only on 18th of March 2006. Now, the relevant aspect here is that the person was detained from 16th of February 2006 and produced only on 18th of March 2006. So the period from 16th of February 2006 to 18th of March 2006, that more than a month, the husband of the petitioner was illegally detained, was the conclusion derived by the Bombay High Court, and the court held, no doubt the antecedents of Subhash Med, that is the husband of the petitioner, do not appear to be clean, but as a citizen of India, when his personal liberty is infringed by Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh police, petitioner is entitled to compensation of rupees 1 lakh. Next, going to the writ of mandamus. What is a writ of mandamus? The word itself, mandamus, is mandate. The meaning of the word mandamus is a Latin word meaning to command. It is termed as a special judicial remedy, wherein this writ is a command to do, as well as command to not to do a particular act against the law. Now, against whom and when can this writ be issued as a command to a lower court or any other tribunal, court, or public authority to perform their public or statutory duty? Now, what are the grounds for issuance of a writ of mandamus? Very clearly stated. These are the general grounds. Later on, there are certain judgments which may or may not, accept certain grounds. But in generality, these are the grounds required for issuance of a writ of mandamus. First, existence of a legal right, demanded performance or justice which is refused. That means the petitioner will have to indicate that he did demand the performance of a particular duty, or he demanded justice from the court, which is refused. It is not for settling private disputes. Petitioner should not be guilty of laches. It is against a public authority who is bound to perform duty of public nature. Duty must not be of discretionary nature, and there should be no illegal act or excess jurisdiction or malafide intention on part of the authorities exercising the jurisdiction. Then it is issued for preventing issuance of unconstitutional order. Now, this is one of those writs where there are certain embargoes. Embargoes meaning against whom it cannot be issued. The writ of mandamus cannot be issued against the President of India, Governor of State, or any private individual, company, or organization. Generally, whenever a petition is filed for issuance of a writ, the prohibition is that there should not be an alternative remedy available. If there is an alternative remedy available, the courts will direct you first to go and exhaust that alternate remedy and then to file a writ. But writ of mandamus, despite availability of an alternate remedy, can be filed. Now, there is one more term in a writ of mandamus which is called as continuing mandamus. Now, what is this continuing mandamus? Interim measures awarded by the High Court in a writ of mandamus is a continuous mandamus. This generally one will notice in case of environmental related petitions. Now, where the acts are to be supervised continuously till the purpose of the petitioner or till the purpose of the litigant is achieved, the various directions given by the Honorable High Court or the Supreme Court for effective implementation of certain acts and deeds to see to it that the ultimate goal is achieved is called as a writ. It's called as continuing mandamus. Now, for writ of mandamus, let us see certain citations which will more clearly highlight the provision of writ of mandamus. The first is 1995 Allahabad Law Journal 534, Raisa Begum versus State of UP. Now, this writ, of course, the facts were very different, but this is one of those citations which very clearly lays out the guidelines which are necessary for issuance of a writ of mandamus. Then the second citation, which is 2008 to SCC 280, Oriental Bank of Commerce versus Sundarlal Jain. This says that in order that a writ of mandamus must be issued, there must be a legal right with the party asking for writ to compel the performance of some statutory duty cast upon the authority. Very actual citation will be AR 1984 Madras 292. Why do I say it factual? Because this was a writ of mandamus directing the respondents to act according to law in removing the hawkers on the road. Now, this is a writ which was filed, K. Sudarshan and others versus Commissioner Corporation of Madras. This was a writ of mandamus which was filed for removal of hawkers from the roadside. These hawkers did have a license from the corporation, but ultimately the High Court came down with a judgment saying that the roads cannot be blocked in such a manner by the hawkers, but because they are licensed by the corporation, the corporation has to safeguard their right to livelihood and provide them alternate site so that they can continue earning their livelihood. So therefore, but of course, protecting the hawkers, but at the same time issuing a writ of mandamus to corporation to remove the hawkers, but in accordance with the provisions of law. The third writ is the writ of quo warranto. What is writ of quo warranto? When you see warranto indicating a warrant, but no, it doesn't kill with any warrant. It means by what authority? Now, when what is the cause of action for filing a writ of quo warranto? Very simply said, in a service matter, when a person is appointed to an office without following either the legal procedure or in contravention of any law or any other illegality, in that case, a writ of quo warranto is issued, questioning the authority under which that particular officer is appointed to that office. Now, to inquire into legality of the claim of a person or public office. This is one part. The second part is to restrain to act in office which he or she is not entitled. Or in other words, it would be more appropriate to say to remove him from that office. Now, what is the object of writ of quo warranto? Very simple. To prevent usurpation of public office. Grounds. Now, not anybody and everybody can file this. Not anybody and against anybody and everybody this can be filed. What are the grounds available for filing a writ of quo warranto? First, it should be a public office. It should be statutory and substantive in nature. Should not be usurped without legal authority. Not authorized by law to hold that office. And the basic ingredient is actual holding. Actual holding means he should be already appointed. The appointment should be done then. It is not before appointment. Once he is appointed, he takes up his office. Only in that case, a writ of quo warranto can be issued. Now, there is a very basic difference between writ of mandamus and writ of quo warranto. Writ of mandamus is a command to do certain act, whereas the writ of quo warranto is challenging an authority, challenging an act of an authority which has already taken place. The highlights of this writ petition is that there is no question of delay. And supposing if an officer is appointed to an office illegally or in contrary to the provisions law, in that case, every day of his office is a new cause of action. Here it is stated who can apply. Any person, though not personal interest, not agreed. So supposing I as a litigant, I find that the commissioner of Thane is appointed without following a proper procedure of law. The law says even I can file a petition bringing it to the knowledge of the court that this appointment is contrary to law and it should be set aside. The scope of this petition generally is service matters, and the citations which will throw light on the writ of quo warranto are, there are quite a few. I will only explain one of them. That is 2013-1 SCC 501 Rajesh Avasthi versus Nandalal Jaiswal. Now, this is a writ which was issued appointing Mr. Rajesh Avasthi as the chairman to the UP State Electricity Board. Now, in this case, what has happened is one of the mandatory requirement of appointment of the chairman is following the provisions of Section 1885(5) of the of the Electricity Act 2003. Now, because of non-following of the provisions of Section 85(5) of the Electricity Act 2003, the Supreme Court came to a conclusion that the appointment of Mr. Rajesh Avasthi is illegal and contrary to law, and therefore this writ of quo warranto was issued against Rajesh Avasthi. Then there are few more judgments. 1993 4 SCC 119 RK Jain versus Union of India. 2013 5 SCC 1 State of Punjab versus Salil Sapro, as well as 2009 8 SCC 273 Mahesh Chandra Gupta versus Union of India. Now, these are just few of the judgments. I'm just listing it. Going through them will indicate as to what are the guidelines or what are the different judgments which indicate how this writ of quo warranto can be issued. Then is the writ of prohibition. Any civil court lawyer would know. Writ of prohibition, in other words, is grant of an injunction preventing some people to do some acts. Of course, those injunctions are in private in suits, but when it comes to High Court, what the High Court issues is a writ of prohibition. But this writ of prohibition, which is termed as an extraordinary writ of preventive nature, when is it issued? It is issued primarily to prevent a lower court or tribunal from exceeding its jurisdiction in a pending case or acting contrary to the principle of natural justice or abuse of judicial. This writ of prohibition is very sparingly exercised, very sparingly. The grounds available, of course, are very common to writ of certiorari. The grounds are when there is excess or absence of jurisdiction, where there is violation of natural justice, where there is infringement of fundamental rights, and where there is error of law. Now, just to pause here for a moment and state what is error of law. Error of law will be when there is mistakenly refusal to admit material evidence that can be admitted, and admitted evidence that are not admissible and same influence the findings, and then findings of facts without evidence. Now, if any of these three ingredients exist, that means refusing to admit evidence, wrongly admitting evidence, or refusing to consider the evidence which should be considered, then it is termed as error of law. These are some of the illustrations. There could be many more. Even in this case, it is said that presence of alternate remedy is not a bar. A very striking example of writ of prohibition is reported in 2003 AIR Supreme Court 3290. This is in case of Tirumala Tirupati Devasthanam versus Thalapakka. Sorry, I will not be able to read it very clearly, but it is Thalapakka Ananta Charayulu. Now, this writ, what had happened in this case, that there was a suit as well as there was a proceeding pending before the revenue court. Now, in the suit, there were certain technical flaws. Certain technical flaws meaning there were preliminary issues to be considered. But at the same time, there was revenue proceedings pending pending between the parties. In this case, the court came to a conclusion that unless till the preliminary issues are decided in the civil court, the revenue divisional officer shall not proceed with the appeal which was pending before it. So this was one of those rarest cases where the writ of prohibition is exercised by the High Court. Then there is one more, 1962 Supreme Court 1893 East India Commercial versus Collector of Custom. Now, this is a very regular, a very common difficulty which is seen by the persons who are indulging into customs or import exports, licensing, so on and so forth. What has happened in this case is that the petitioner had imported certain goods under a valid license. Thereafter, the custom authorities issued a notice under 167(8) for an inquiry that these goods were prohibited under the Act, and the petitioner was given a show cause notice to explain, to which the petitioner explained that there was a license available to him under which he has imported these goods. So here the Supreme Court issued a writ of prohibition restraining the custom authorities from an inquiry under section 167(8) of Sea Customs Act. Then there's one more judgment, of course, on the same grounds. 1995 5 SCC 716 UP Sales Tax Service Association versus Tax Bar Association. Next is writ of certiorari. The most popularly writ exercised by the litigants. This is a corrective writ. It means certiorari means to certify, issued by the Supreme Court or High Court for quashing the order already passed by an inferior court, tribunal or quasi-judicial authority. Grounds same as earlier explained: excess or defective or abuse of jurisdiction, violation of principle of natural justice, and apparent error of law. When? Now, writ of certiorari is issued after the order is declared. Here there are certain embargoes not issued against individual, company, private authority, association or tribunal having no judicial or quasi-judicial authority, cannot be used for declaration that act is unconstitutional or ultra vires. Now, for an order to be quashed and set aside under writ of certiorari, what are the circumstances under which they can be set aside? If the allegations are, if there is that no proper hearing is given, the reasoning are improper, there was bias, no judge in own cause, and justice should be manifestly and undoubtedly seems to be done. If any of these ingredients are found in the order or not found in the order, then the order can be quashed and set aside under writ of certiorari. Now, 2015 5 SCC 423 is the most popular citation on writ of certiorari. It explains under what circumstances and how a writ of certiorari can be issued, and it also explains the simple difference between 226 and 227. A very common, very easily understood example is AIR 1954 Allahabad 3. Here, the petitioner was convicted under section 352 and 447, 426 of IPC by Panchayati Adalat. He approached SDM, the subdivisional magistrate, who modified the order, which was without legal right, indicating that the SDM had neither a right nor a power to set aside or modify or deal with the order. In that case, it was quashed by writ of certiorari. Then 55 Supreme Court 233. This in fact indicates the difference between writ of certiorari and writ of prohibition. What is the difference between writ of certiorari and writ of prohibition? Very simple. Both the stage at which the writs are issued is different. Writ of certiorari is for quashing the or setting aside decision what had been done. Means an order is already passed. Then a writ of certiorari. Whereas if the proceedings are going on, then there is a writ of prohibition which is to be issued. These are the 5 different types of writs. Now going to general, a fast track reading of certain provisions. First is the general principles or requisitions of issuance of writs. Generally, these are generally taken as the circumstances for grant of a writ. First, proceeds to act without or excess of jurisdiction, proceeds to act in violation of principle of justice, natural justice, proceeds to act under law or act which is ultra vires, proceeds to act in contravention of fundamental rights. And what are the embargoes? Means under what circumstances writ cannot be issued. First and foremost, the writ's exercise of jurisdiction of writ is to be exercised sparingly, to correct errors of jurisdiction, not to upset pure finding of facts, and not where alternate remedy is available. These are the general embargoes on writs. Now, having seen what is a writ, that there are 2 powers, one under Article 32 and High Court having power under 226 and 227. Let us understand the difference between the two. Now, what is the difference between writ by Supreme Court and writ by High Court? This is in very short to understand the basic difference. Writ by Supreme Court is issued under Article 32 of the Constitution. Writ by High Court is issued under Article 226 and 227 of the Constitution. Writ by Supreme Court is only for enforcement of fundamental rights. Here, I would say that under 139 there are powers which could increase the jurisdiction of Article 32, but only when those powers are exercised. But writ by High Court is having little more scope in a sense that it can be issued for enforcement of fundamental as well as constitutional and legal rights. Then Supreme Court territorial jurisdiction throughout India, whereas High Court will be only where the cause of action arose. Article 32 is a fundamental right in itself, whereas 226 and 227 are constitutional rights. Article 32 can be suspended during emergency, but Article 226 and 227 cannot. Then let us also understand the difference between Article 226 and 227. Now, Article 226 is original jurisdiction. Original jurisdiction, when we say it, means within the, now supposing Mumbai, so the territorial jurisdiction of Bombay High Court is from a particular, say Mulund to VT, or say from Churchgate to Virar. So this is the territorial jurisdiction. So the High Court of Mumbai can issue, this is the original jurisdiction of Mumbai High Court. Thane district, that becomes appellate jurisdiction of the High Court. So writ under Article 226 is of original jurisdiction, and 227 is supervisory jurisdiction to be sparingly used in appropriate cases causing injustice or failure of justice. 226 may simply annul or quash proceedings, whereas under Article 227, not only annul and quash, but it can also make directions or guidelines in a manner to proceed or substitute the impugned decision. Sorry. Under Article 26 has to be exercised on a power made by or on behalf of the aggrieved person, whereas under Article 227 it is suo motu as well. This is Article 226 is for correcting gross errors, and Article 227 is for keeping subordinate courts within their limits of jurisdiction. There are two, of course, judgments differentiating between Article 226 and 227. One is Surya Devi Rai versus Ramchandra Rai, reported in 2003 6 SCC 675, as well as Umaji Keshav Mishra versus Radhika Bai, that is 1986 AIR SC 1272. So these are the basic difference between these three articles. Just one small point before I put an end to my lecture. The most probably the difference between pleadings. When we generally draft a suit or we file any pleadings before the trial court, we plead all the facts. But the general and the basic difference when you file a writ is you have to not only plead facts, but you have also to plead evidence. Now, supposing, for example, I file a writ where I am seeking order directions from the Honorable High Court to demolish a structure which is illegal. In that case, in my petition, I have not only to plead how the structure is illegal, but I also have to plead as to how I have come to a conclusion or what is the evidence indicating my pleading that that particular structure is illegal. So this is the difference between pleading in a suit and pleading in a writ. So principle of pleading in writ. This is very, very clearly laid down by a very landmark judgment, which is AIR 1988 Supreme Court 2181, which says, Apex Court held that the party raising the point must plead an annex to the petition, not only the facts, but also the evidence in proof of facts. When a point, sorry, spelling mistake, when a point which is ostensibly a point of law is required to be substantiated by facts, the writ petition must plead and prove such facts which must appear from the writ petition. The difference, pleading in suit is only facts to be pleaded, but in a pleading in a writ, facts as well as evidence pleaded and annexed. So with this, a brief explanation on the law of writs comes to an end.
Let me first go with the person who introduced you, Soham. Soham, give your impression.
So the lecture was really very interesting. I could remember, and ma'am has explained it in so brief that I remembered the constitution lectures which we had in our college. It was so precisely and explained that each and every writ and where it is applicable and what are the points which have to be considered while making it was explained. So it was actually a wonderful lecture. Thank you, ma'am, once again.
Over to Ramesh Kuti.
Sir, in fact, there are many lawyers. They specialize at various fields, like civil, like taxation, like criminal side. I'm not sure that most of the lawyers are well versed with it, though they are practicing in High Court. They are well versed with all the 5 types of.
It will be useful for them. And over to Shiva Prakash and then to Egmore, Suresh and Vignesh.
Good evening, Anita madam. It was really a very wonderful session, and you started from the types of writs, the conditions applicable when the various writs can be invoked by the High Court, and the writ when the Supreme Court can invoke under Article 32, and the difference between the Article 226 and 32, and more so the difference between 226 and 227. That is really a wonderful session, wonderful analysis. And the case laws, you have taken very apt case laws necessary for your presentation and which are all required for our practice also. And regarding the liberty, you talked about that Justice Bhagwati's judgment. It was very relevant. And overall, it was very nice sessions, madam. And I think you took much pain to concise to 45 minutes. I think it will be really difficult task for 45 minutes to concise the entire law of writs. But you have now explained in a very lucid manner and very attractive. Thank you, madam.
Ma'am, first of all, ma'am, I thoroughly enjoyed the session today. Right from the types of writ to the limitation, as well as the difference, all the aspects, ma'am, you have covered, no doubt on that. And your experience could very well be seen from the lecture today. Thank Madras Presidency Lawyers Forum, ma'am, and ma'am for this wonderful session today. Thank you.
Suresh, yeah.
अनीता मैडम जी, आपके लिए मेरे तरफ से धन्यवाद है. It is a very good, experienced lecture which you have given. It shows your entire skill over that particular subject. In which force you have given is really excellent one. We are very grateful to MPLF. We need another section from you, madam. Very glad to.
Over to Bhaskar Keshav.
Good evening, madam. The session is very wonderful. I am practicing at the district court, Krishnagiri, Tamil Nadu. Though I am practicing at Krishnagiri in district court, the sessions is very useful to know the writ for filing before the High Court or the Supreme Court. You are explaining in detail and also in simplicity, and also you have mentioned a lot of citations, which is very useful to us here. Very thankful for the occasion. We are learning from you. Thank you, madam.
They are from down south. Narayanan and thereafter Manikandan. Narayanan, unmute yourself. You have to unmute.
Yeah. It just got unmuted. Good evening, Anita madam. This was a nice session because what I wanted to say other people have already told. So it's a good explanation, especially that Article 226 and 227, the difference and the thing what you have told. It's really useful to us. Practically, the citation and other things we have already taken the note. I thought we will use in our other practicing also. Thank you very much for your good lecture.
Good evening, madam. It was a wonderful session. And presented in a very comfortable and presentable manner, which was very comfortable for all the participants here, including myself. You have literally did the foundation for all the participants here, wherein you have taken the entire beginning, giving the lecture in a simplified manner. Though the entire topic is very vast and very tough one when compared to other field of practice, you have literally presented in a very simplified manner, which will be easily understood by anyone who listens to the session. Thank you, madam. Thank you for giving a wonderful session for our MPLF.
Yes, sir. For 5 minutes.
Anita, firstly, I would like to thank on my behalf that you have delivered a beautiful lecture. Actually, I would just second what Soham had said, that it made me feel that I was in the lecture my college days. That was a very beautiful lecture. So, saying that, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mrs. Anita for taking us through the various remedies, including which are inscribed in our constitution. Its importance and when can these constitutional remedies be invoked by a litigant. I thank you, Anita ma'am, personally. I would also like to thank Ravi sir and other respected members of Madras Presidency Lawyers Forum for providing this valuable knowledge series to all of us. And I also like to thank all the attendees today. Thank you, sir. Thank you.